Anybody who misses it needs to catch up. And over to you.
Thank you, Ken. So today we will be discussing about intersections. Before I hop straight into the content though, I did just want to hop into the Module 2 design. So thank you for those that have submitted the assignments online. I've graded several of them so far. Appreciate people have submitted them today, but the assignments are coming in. They're looking fantastic and certainly getting the right feedback so far, which is promising. I actually received two interesting points within the assignment from Mark Thorpe and Vince Green, who are both going to be getting some rewards for this or some prizes as well. So do you want to note their names down as well, Ken? Because they popped out a really interesting point and it's to do with the intersection. So I thought while we're talking about it today, why don't we have a look? So I'll just show you, both of them have actually come up with this issue or noted this issue. So this cycle lane extends across this intersection here as so. And what we have on the traffic lane is, I'll just try and draw their movement using this yellow arrow, is it crosses over and conflicts with the bicycle lane. And that is quite a significant or quite a dangerous arrangement that you've got there, because this inner traffic lane could block the sight lines for the outer traffic lane. So in other words, if you've got a car that's here and giving way to a cyclist, your outer traffic lane may not know that that's happening, may just assume that they're slowing down to turn the corner and may collide with the cyclist. So this intersection design is actually pretty poor in terms of cyclist safety. And we will be looking at ways that we can improve that. And that's what today's topic is all going to be about. So well done to Mark and Vince for picking up on that issue. The module assignment is not meant to be a detailed analysis. So don't feel like if you didn't pick that up that you haven't passed the assignments. It's certainly not, we're not expecting you to get into that level of detail, but just sort of something worth sharing with the rest of the group. We've had 100 or so participants do this exact module, and it's the first time that issue has come up. So very keen, eagle eyes there. Well done, guys. Cool.
Yes, a good pick up there. Dynamic visual instruction, always a good one to look for with double turn movements anyway. That masking. Now remember to put your questions into the chat. I'll feed them through to Max as we go. But otherwise, carry on, please.
That's back on the presentation now, Ken?
Yep, seeing the presentation.
Superb. Good news for everyone that missed Wally in the last session. He is back. So we do have a module quiz at the end of today, and it kind of encompasses module 2 and 3. So you will need to refer to last week's webinar as well as this week's. But make sure that you're counting Wally, because he is going to pop up in today's slides. This one is not included in the count, just to recall. I also just wanted to include this as another on-road treatment that we didn't get around to explain during last week's module. There's so many discussion points within the on-road cycling space, so I've just brought it forward to have a quick conversation about it today. And this is known as a bicycle boulevard. And what we have here is we have a shared travel lane. So that means both directions of vehicles in both directions use one shared travel lane. And then we have bicycle lanes either side. And you may have parking, you may not have parking. I'll show you what that looks like kind of on the ground. It'll make more sense once you can kind of picture it. But basically, traffic can travel in both directions, share this one general traffic lane, and cyclists always get a lane, which is in the shoulder or curbside. And the reason this is so interesting is it's rather than have the assumed vehicles are always given a traffic lane one way each direction, it's forcing motorists to instead reallocate that space and give priority to maintaining cyclist movements through these routes and forcing motorists to slow and give way to oncoming traffic. I'll show you, this is just, a sign that they also use in this particular example. It's not one we'd probably use within Australia or New Zealand, but the same kind of information does apply. The reason I'm bringing it up is because we do have a trial of one of these going on at the moment in Victoria. There is already one installed in Perth, in Western Australia. But yes, I just thought I'd show you a little diagram of how this works. So currently we can see there's a car that's kind of approaching, heading northbound or at the top of the screen. And you've got cyclists that are traveling within their bicycle lanes. As a car notices an oncoming traffic, both vehicles kind of have to slow, look for any cyclists within the bicycle lane, and then safely pass one another. And none of that interrupts the cyclist movement. So no, the cyclists aren't impeded there. They're not the ones forced to slow down, or their bicycle lane isn't impacted upon. It's just the vehicles need to slow down. Obviously, these treatments are most appropriate in very low volume, and we've already got low operating speed. So this particular example is in Napier Street in Fitzroy. If you want to have a look, I can send details over the trial later on though, if you are interested. But just another on-road bicycle solution that you could look at in kind of local streets is where you'd be going for those ones. For those that have had a look at last week's 360-degree footage, you will note that we provided 2 on-road cycling facilities. Example number 1 being the protected bicycle lane. Example number 2 is cycling right beside the dooring zone. And in example number 2, the bicycle lane just drops off and then it's nothing. So hopefully everyone got an appreciation of those 2 different facilities and got to experience exactly the amazing benefits of having an on-road protected bicycle lane. If you haven't had a look yet, strongly encourage you to get the goggles on or to click on the link and yes, get that perspective, because it really tells a story when you actually get to see it for yourself. But today we are focusing on intersections, and I quote this very appropriately named guidance document regularly in this document, which is called "Don't Give Up at the Intersection, Designing for All Ages and Abilities." And this is from NACTO, which is a US reference. So a lot of the terminology, it may not directly correlate to what we would use in Australia or New Zealand. However, the principles and the overall concepts we can certainly apply, and it'll make sense once you you just probably detract the way that they refer to certain things, but we'll go through all of that. So we will be focusing a lot on protected intersections, and this is a relatively new concept, so we will spend a fair bit of time discussing protected intersections and what exactly that means and why they offer such an improved level of safety for vulnerable road users, so it's for pedestrians and for cyclists. We'll go through some international examples of where protected intersections have actually been installed, and we've actually got one in Melbourne as well. So we're also going to provide some detail as to how the Melbourne protected intersection was developed, and we'll go through the design in a bit of detail as well. The second half of this presentation will focus on signalized intersections, and we'll go through things like head starts, trying to design at left turn and through treatments, which are very challenging, particularly if you're thinking about a slip lane and a bicycle lane kind of goes across that, how to work out what to do within that space. We'll discuss things like hook turns, which are used very, very commonly here in Melbourne and may not be as common in other jurisdictions, and bicycle signals. So another jam-packed session today, and I might just hop straight into our protected intersections. And I've got this artistic rendition of what a protected intersection is. And what we have here, you can see at each corner of the intersection are these little curb outstands, or they're called blister islands sometimes, or safety islands. And they sit out deliberately to provide an offset from the bicycle lane and the general traffic lane. So you can see there's an offset there. And don't worry, I've got plenty more diagrams that can display this relationship. So if that doesn't make sense just yet, don't be too stressed. But the reason that this intersection works so well is it forces vehicles that are turning left. So I will just highlight this vehicle's movement on the left here. It forces them to slow down and to actually cast their line of sight towards cyclists. In other words, cyclists are crossing within their windscreen view rather than across their shoulder. So rather than crossing in a point that's very difficult to see cyclists are straight in front of them. That's the general principle of how these protected intersections work. And we will go into a bit more detail as to how you would actually apply it and what the design considerations need to be. So let's have a look here. We do have a conventional intersection that's shown on the left-hand side, which demonstrates you've got a very narrow offset between where the cyclist rides and where the traffic lane is. And what this in turn means, when a vehicle turns left in front of the bicycle lane, assuming both of them have a green, so they can both, they're both permitted to travel in a straight movement, you've got this very limited, or you can see the focus of that driver's line of sight is not directed where the cyclist is actually crossing. In other words, if you could imagine you were in that vehicle there, to actually be able to spot the cyclist that's traveling in the bicycle lane is very hard. It's to the left and at the back of your vehicle. So on the far side of the vehicle, where the blind spot of the vehicle also is. So very, very difficult to be able to see it. And that's just purely based on the geometry of this particular intersection. For protected intersection, what we've done is we've increased this offset. So we've increased where the bicycle lane and where the traffic lane is. So you've created a larger gap or a larger clearance between those two road users. And so what we have here instead, when a vehicle is turning left into an intersection, their line of sight is now focused exactly where the cyclist is crossing. Okay, so that's the main safety benefit. Instead of having cyclists kind of hidden at the back of the vehicle, where vehicles will generally just assume there's no one there, or perhaps slow down, but not give enough attention to any cyclists that may be popping up. The protected intersection instead puts cyclists at the forefront, right in the windscreen view of these left turning vehicles. A few more slides that can help demonstrate it if you're still trying to comprehend what's going on with these two different intersection types. So conventional intersection, I'll just look at the northern leg of what we're looking at here. This has actually got a little protection, some type of curved arrangement here. Most intersections, I dare say, would have nothing. You would just have a bit of paint to separate the traffic lane and the bicycle lane. But anyway, for this particular example, let's have a look. So imagine as a cyclist, you're traveling through and down like this, and the vehicle is traveling to the left. That kind of conflict point, and my very wobbly lines there, I'll try and fix that up. Sorry about that. A little bit better. But you can see that intersection point, that conflict point, is very acute. And when we look at crash types, we tend to get more favorable crash angles, and we can see we get better sight distances when we have crashes that occur at those T intersections, or where they are crossing, perpendicular. When they're crossing behind you, much more challenging to see. So let's have a look at the protected intersection and see how instead that one works. So we've got the left turning vehicle once again turning in this fashion, and the cyclist gets taken offset over here. So you can see that angle between those two there is more perpendicular. So it's more of a 90-degree angle. And that's where you get the improved line of sight. And yes, the improvements in actually being able to, both for the cyclist to see left turning traffic and the left turning traffic to be able to see cyclists and pedestrians within that space as well. Here's an actual example of what I'm talking about on the ground. This left one is in Melbourne. And this I've just called a conventional intersection. Once again, I wouldn't actually assume that these are actually in place in a conventional intersection, but imagine you wanted to travel straight ahead as a cyclist. A left-turning vehicle needs to pull out in front of you, like so, and it's not generally a fantastic angle to be able to see cyclists. Also, left-turning vehicles may just see the green light and assume they could go and completely neglect that there could be cyclists within the bicycle lane. So there's also that aspect. And I've also just compared this to a protected intersection, which is in Caloundra in Queensland. This is a new housing development where they've just built some really fantastic cycling infrastructure. They've also got a bi-directional bicycle lane or an off-road shared path kind of facility here that you can see. So that's kind of ties into what we were talking about last week, having both directions of travel for the cyclists on one side of the road, which is what they've provided here. But you can see by providing these kind of little outstands, there's areas where you're pushing the general traffic lane and the cyclists away from each other, providing that offset. What you have is an increased ability for left-turning vehicles just straight in front of them see cyclists crossing. I appreciate this may be a new topic for a lot of people and maybe a little bit confusing. So I will just go through some details now, but I'll check in with Ken first to see if we've got any questions I should be answering.
There's two that I've sort of mentioned you'll talk a little bit more about. One's the ability for larger vehicles to navigate through these intersections. And the other one was around sort of the types of intersections, the volumes of traffic and cyclists you would want to select an intersection like this and whether it could work on lower volume intersections.
Yep. So the first question regarding heavy vehicles, I've got a pretty good slide that will discuss that in a bit more detail. So I might just park that one for the moment. With regards to particular volumes or where these protected intersections would work best, there's no required metrics that would suggest that this is when you would apply a protected intersection or not. However, if you have got strategic cycling corridors, or you've identified high priority cycling routes and they cross arterial roads or high busy environments where you do have even high volumes of traffic and heavy vehicles and the like, because you've strategically identified that is an important cycling corridor, those are the ones that would warrant the level of investment for a protected intersection, because you want to encourage high cycling volumes and also safer cycling movements within that intersection. So to me, it comes back to the strategic intention of the intersection. If you can apply them at every intersection, that's obviously a real bonus, but working within the realms of feasibility, we would tend to see protected intersections earmarked for where we have nominated strategic cycling corridors.
And what about unsignalised intersections?
The same principles can certainly apply for unsignalised intersections. For those that have seen, there's a couple diagrams. I haven't included them in this presentation, but there's things called like, I'll try and do a quick sketch here. If you've got like a T intersection, goes out like this. It's gone on me, Ken. Hang on, I'll try again. I've got a T intersection like this, and this could be unsignalized, give way treatment or something like that. There's things called like bent out treatments. So you could have a bicycle lane that kind of goes out here and then gets bent out across the intersection and then back like this. And what that means is you can raise this whole area on this side here. So you can step that up. So where pedestrians and cyclists cross the threshold, they're given priority. And those kind of principles also work with that protected intersection, in that when a left-turning vehicle actually crosses the cyclist path, they've got a much better chance of seeing cyclists because of their line of sight there has improved, as opposed to a cyclist just going straight through.
Yeah.
So yes,
Okay.
it can certainly still apply in a long-winded way. It can certainly still apply to unsignalized intersections.
Thanks, Max.
Let's have a look at our design. So as I said, this is from a US resource. So if you don't understand the terminology, I'll try and translate them, but your jurisdiction may also use different terms. So let's just hop straight into it. So we've got these corner refuge islands, as I said, sometimes called safety islands or just extended blisters or something like that. And what they do is they actually force a vehicle to take a different path. So they're forcing the general traffic out, and basically they are what creates this offset between general traffic and cyclists. So without that, you would have the ability as a car to travel straight across the cycle path. So if that wasn't there, you could have something like that alignments, which would defeat the purpose of building these protected intersections. So that's kind of one of the key features of the protected intersections. In the first slide that I had the full artist impressions and I drew on the four corners, that's what the corner refuge islands are. So that's at each side of the intersection, you'll have one of those. They are mountable within reason. So I'll go into a bit more detail as to how they actually function and how they look in the coming slides. Number two here, I've got the forward bicycle queuing area, perhaps just referred to as a queuing area. And that is basically where a cyclist would wait for the green light to go. So rather than having to wait within the traffic lane, which is what would typically happen, or you'd have a head start waiting in front of cars, you're placed off to the side of the general traffic away from that lane, and you have your own dedicated area. What's also interesting about this design is they've got different areas for the pedestrians as well as the cyclists, which is something that I really strongly encourage and recommend. You don't want to be creating like a shared area where cyclists and pedestrians cross within these protected intersections, because cyclists will be able to travel a lot faster and it would be very uncomfortable for pedestrians or people in wheelchairs to be, I suppose, trying to avoid cyclists traveling at speed. So it's good to see that they've got separate, delineated, here's the cyclists, this is where they cross, here's where the pedestrians cross. We've got the motorist yield zone, which is just over here, kind of denoted by this ... line marking here. We would call that perhaps giveaway signage or giveaway area. In Netherlands, they use kind of this shark's teeth, which we'll see in a couple slides time, which will show just another way that shows that motorists need to give way and they're not given the priority when turning into the minor leg. We've got separated, pedestrian crossing islands. So that's just these features here. Pedestrian crossing of the separated bike lane is this little feature here. And so what that actually means, drawings are getting out of control again, but you'll see the zebra marking is actually extended across the bike lane. And I think that's a really important thing to consider. What we don't want to see is cyclists that have just ended their run and then they continue and then they just get this priority all the way through, because that would make pedestrians a little bit nervous to cross the road because they would have to look and give way to cyclists. So instead, we don't give priority to cyclists within this space. We've extended the zebra crossing across the bike lane. And what that means is cyclists would need to give way to any pedestrians that cross that space. Ken.
Oh, sorry, a couple of points raised there. One's about that light pole or signal pedestal or whatever it is in the island, which I think you're going to mention. But the other one was associated with the markings at that little bit of zebra crossing you're pointing out there. What are they? Dragon's teeth, raised markings?
In this example, they're not actually raised. So you can kind of see in the 3D diagram on this side, it's all one flush level. However, what those little teeth mean. So it's sometimes dragon teeth or shark's teeth, and that refers to give way or yield. So it's just another jurisdiction in the States that what they use, and also in lots of European countries as well. So it's just how they denote give way.
Yep. And also the crossing itself in this is signalized, but they mark it like a zebra crossing. Is that right? Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah. So this is signalized. Yeah. And yeah, certainly that pole would be getting struck very frequently if that was actually installed like that. Because the corner refuge islands actually have quite a tight radius deliberately to try and slow vehicles. There is also, you would need to do swept paths to determine exactly what type of tracking would occur over it, but it would be incredibly likely that vehicles would track straight over that. Certainly heavy vehicles and long vehicles, meaning that they would strike that pole. And I'll get into more design detail later on and how you can exactly cater for those long vehicles. But let's have a look at some international examples. So I've got up here, this is in the Netherlands. This is a before type situation, and I'm just going to focus on one leg just to make it easier to explain. So I'm going to focus on this northern leg here. You can see there's a little dotted bicycle lane that kind of runs curbside, and I'm just going to draw the movement of this cyclist heading straight on like that. And I'll change my pen color. Let's go a blue. So we do a left turning vehicle that wants to go in this direction. And this is being flipped for those astute people wondering if the Netherlands drive on the left hand or the right hand side. They do drive on the right hand side. We've just flipped this to make it a little bit clearer. But what I want to show with this particular slide is you can see that conflict angle right here, very acute, very difficult for the left turning vehicle to be able to spot the cyclist. So as the cyclist travels through this intersection, they would need to make the decision, do I head straight through and hope that no one turns left in front of me? Do I pause and give way and, you know, potentially hold up my journey and the journey of people behind me? Or do I just, you know, kind of cross as a pedestrian? If you're not comfortable with these intersections at all, you may just come off your bike altogether and cross as a pedestrian, which is not great for obviously the continuity of your ride and just the overall attractiveness of the facility. So let's have a look at how they've actually upgraded this intersection to a protected intersection. So you can see things have changed quite dramatically, and I'll show the same movements that those cyclists and motor traffic would now experience in this given condition. So cyclists now come off road, look at that beautiful offset, and cycle, 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 and then get taken off in a fashion like that. The left turning vehicle from that leg comes down and left like so. And that point of conflict now, much more perpendicular, much easier to see the cyclists. Basically right in your windscreen, so they're right in front of you, and you know exactly if you're going to have to give way, if you're going to have to stop, or you're free, or you're clear. So it's just much improved. For those that have noticed those little shark's teeth that denote that yield or give way, that's just what's used in the other jurisdictions. So if it's not familiar, that's no problem at all. It's just how other people do it. Here's what it looks like on the ground. And I do want to make one slight suggestion to the Dutch folk, which is if we were to install this in Oz or New Zealand, we would be raising these. It seems very, very strange that these are just at grade, because what the Australian, what I would assume the general traffic in Australia and New Zealand would do is they would track straight over that. No problem. There's not a lot of reasoning, there's not a lot of intention that a vehicle would not do that. In other words, it's not obvious enough on the road infrastructure that is actually something that you should be avoiding. If that was raised, however, and perhaps, contrasting pavement to make it stand out a little bit better, that would make it a lot safer. However, this is the Netherlands, and the Dutch, they have cyclists everywhere. So I can understand from their perspective that perhaps they don't need the same level of infrastructure that we may need within our context, because vehicles are used to seeing cyclists at every single intersection that they pass. So they're used to having to slow and stop and give way to cyclists. It's part of their society, it's part of their community, but I couldn't see this kind of flush corner refuge island working within our context. So something I've included within these slides, but yes, not something I think we're quite ready for at this stage. Let's just get a few more of them out there, and then we can get to this level, I guess. I've added this other design here, which is in the States, in Maryland. And this one has got raised corner refuge islands, which are at each corner of the intersection, as you can see. And what they also have is a hatched area, which is made from concrete, and that's mountable. So they've got one section which is much closer to the bicycle lane, which has a physical curb that separates the two movements. And then they have the mountable area, which is just a concrete mountable curb. That's the reason that that's been installed is exclusively to allow for heavy vehicle and long vehicle movements. So as we know, those who do this swept path designs know that heavy vehicles and long vehicles, they require a lot more space in able to maneuver, particularly left turn movements. And so that's why those additional pavement areas are created. Now you could argue, well, do we really need to use a concrete pavement there to contrast? Couldn't you just keep that as regular asphalt and only build the kind of raised sections here? And I think, although I can understand that kind of point of view, the reason that it is effective to use this contrasting pavement is because it just raises the conspicuity of the intersection treatment. In other words, general traffic now will use that type of movement rather than having to go right up to the edge of the corner refuge island, and providing a greater offset between the bicycle lane and general traffic is a big win at these intersections. So I would still recommend, even if you could argue that just treat the whole flush surface with asphalt, having that contrasting pavement helps to delineate that space and push general traffic movements further away from the bicycle lane. Another reason I included this particular example is this facility actually has a bi-directional facility. So cyclists can travel in both directions on one of the legs there. And I'll show you on the ground how that actually looks. So you can see, here's what I was talking about. That's the flush concrete, and that is completely mountable. So for heavy vehicles, for trucks, long vehicles, buses, they can mount that as necessary to get around and perform their movements. However, this physical curb would stop just general traffic accessing the bicycle lane there. Ken, I might pause there and check if we've got any comments or any questions.
No, we're good to keep going, Max.
No problem. I've got one more international example, and then we'll step into our Melbourne protected intersection. But this one may look a little bit more familiar, a little bit more consistent to how we would tend to do things in Australia and New Zealand, just in terms of the intersection arrangement and the pavement colours and things like that. This is in the UK. This is in Manchester, known as the Cycle Optimised Protected Signals Junction, which is quite a mouthful, but its acronym is Cyclops. So if you want to type in Cyclops Junction, you'll get a good look at this one. It's been fairly well received by the community and by cyclists alike. And it's got the exact same philosophies. A little bit difficult to see here, but because it's kind of the same color, but that is the corner refuge island on each of the intersections. Sorry, on each corner of the intersection. So they've all been built out. They all allow for a pedestrian crossing and a separated cycle crossing. But the reason I've included this one in this presentation, which I think is a really good idea, is so say if you are a cyclist and you wanted to turn right, heading from the west of the screen or just the left-hand side, you'd kind of wait here, wait for your green light to go. Oh, hang on, sorry, not there. You'd wait here, wait for your green light to go. You get the go, head around, do the same thing, pause and wait at this intersection, wait for the green to go, and then you're on your way and you continue on your journey. However, if you are a more confident cyclist or you are very happy, you've been riding this route for years and you're happy claiming the lane and mixing with general traffic, this gigantic bicycle box still encourages movements of that nature or a traditional intersection. In other words, if you wanted to, you could still prop and wait here, wait for the green to go, pause and wait here for your gap, and then continue your cycle movement, which is obviously a less circuitous route to take. And yeah, it would really only apply for those that feel comfortable in doing that. But I do like that this design has kind of catered for both levels of cycle experience. In other words, for those that don't feel comfortable approaching intersections at all, it's a completely protected facility. And for those who are just interested in getting there as quickly as possible and feel comfortable claiming the traffic lane, you've still got that there as an option. So I think that's a really clever design aspect for this particular job. I'll show you how things look on the ground, just so things make a little bit more sense. This is cloudy Manchester, but you can see how those facilities all interact. And if I hop onto the next slide, there's some cyclists there riding through. One of the questions that is worth kind of discussing is whether or not you have your pedestrian and cyclist to this facilities kind of switched, which side of the road do each of them go on. And in the previous example, I mean, in the overall concept, you would have remembered the note that I made of providing a zebra crossing where cyclists are actually crossing over the pedestrian path, because we do still want to assign pedestrian priority, being that they are, you know, the slower road user in this space, and we don't want to just be encouraging high cyclist speeds that would then take away the safety and attractiveness for pedestrians. So that's one of the aspects of this design that could potentially be improved. And I might just draw, just for one last time, how the left-hand turn movements will work just on this slide. So I've got my vehicle turning left at this location, and you can see a pedestrian crossing within their space, or a cyclist crossing within this space is right in front of them. Ken. Sorry, you're on mute, Ken.
Thank you. There's a couple of comments in there. Just questioning whether it could be confusing to vehicles going through there at all.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a lot of paint, and I think it looks a lot more confusing from this aerial image. However, it's just one of those things. Once you've, you know, gotten accustomed to it, you understand what's going on, and yeah, exactly where the priority lies, I think you'd come more and more used to it. And the other side of that coin is perhaps the little bit of driver hesitancy. Ooh, am I meant to give way to cyclists here? Should I slow down? It could further reduce operating speeds within that area and create that kind of, yeah, that kind of benefit as well. So there's certainly lots of consultation that went out with this particular project. As you can imagine, this is a fairly novel treatment. So certainly plenty of information was shared prior to making this go live.
Yeah, and also potentially, I think Steve was also a bit concerned about the multiple options for where cyclists could go to do that turn, potentially confusing. Another one was in about who has priority, potentially at. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly which one Naomi is pointing to there, so we might just leave that one for now. And any reason cyclists, which who gives way to cyclists?
So at the roads, when the green goes, that means this traffic, this 12 movement are allowed to go, and cyclists are allowed to travel here. And it also means left turning traffic can travel there. If you were turning into this minor leg, cyclists have the priority on this leg.
Yep.
Yep.
Any reason why green is the cycle lane color?
Every jurisdiction has their own interpretation. Green is quite common here in Oz and New Zealand, I believe. New Zealand, yeah. Denmark is blue, and other jurisdictions use red and yellow for shared zones. And yeah, just different jurisdictions have different ideas of what a cycle lane should look like.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
That's all right. May have also noted these yellow stripes. Those are used in the UK. They denote no parking or no standing. Don't know why you'd put them at an intersection, as to, I don't know how you could possibly park there, but they are used in the mid-block to denote if you're allowed to park there or not. So it's actually a pretty handy thing. Okay, let's have a look at Melbourne's protected intersection. So I've got, this is the before any intervention was in place, and I will just focus on one side of the intersection just to help with the storytelling a little bit. So I'll focus on the southeastern corner, and I've got actually a protected bicycle lane on this side of the alignment, and it just drops off after this parked vehicle, and it's basically a free-for-all up into the intersection, because that left turn lane is shared by by bicycle traffic that up until then had a protected bicycle lane. So it's a pretty poor outcome for cyclists, because they had this protected facility, and then when they get to the intersection, it's just been, nah, it's too hard. And that relates back to the guidance document of don't give up at the intersection, because we don't want to just be dropping off bicycle lanes at the intersection and let cyclists fare for themselves, because it doesn't create a very nice journey. And there's often an expression that the weakest part of the journey is enough to kind of ruin the entire cyclist's opinion of the infrastructure in itself. In other words, if you build a beautiful shared path facility or protected bicycle lane that runs, could run kilometers, but it doesn't get them to where they need to go, or there's one part of the journey that is just an intolerable risk for them, or what they perceive as an intolerable risk, that would be enough for them to not use that at all. And that would likely have been the case with this current arrangements. And I think this would also showcase as to what I've been talking about with the left turning vehicle, just turning directly in front of a cyclist. So let's just have a look. If a left turning vehicle gets into this lane and goes like that, and our cyclist, he happened to just be right behind that vehicle and just going like that, you've got a conflict point right there. But if it happened further along, you'd have a conflict point right at the intersection there as well. So not the best practice example. Instead, I'll just show how things compared before and after. And for those that are counting stand-up lanes, you may have noticed that we are now missing one of our stand-up lanes. So stand-up lanes are the number of lanes approaching the intersection. So I'll just show you before we had 3. We had one dedicated left hand, one dedicated through, and I believe that's through and right. that one on the outside. And instead we've combined the inside one to a through and left, and the outside to a through and right. And let's have a look now how a cyclist fares within this space. So I'll go back to my pen, red here. So the protected bicycle lane is now extended all the way along, and here's that offset that we've been talking about. So you're offset from the general traffic lane, you're pushed away from where vehicles will be traveling. And what that then in turn means is a general traffic turning in front of you, and they'll be able to spot you. Much better arrangement. So here's the full intersection completed. Melbourne's protected intersection. Looks very similar to all the designs we've been running through to date, where you can see the 4 safety islands or blister islands, corner refuges that are shown at each quadrant of the intersection. And that ensures that vehicles are using them to navigate around the intersection rather than tracking and entering the bicycle lane in order to make that left turn movement. So let's have a look at how this design actually developed. So this is an early rendition of how things were looking, and pretty early on it was acknowledged that yes, one of the stand-up lanes is certainly going to have to be sacrificed. So that was right at the start, that was acknowledged as part of the project. However, because this is on the strategic cycling corridor and this connects straight into Melbourne CBD, and because you've already got the protected bicycle lanes kind of running adjacent this section, this was seen as really the weak spot of the entire corridor. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is having to sacrifice a general traffic lane for improved cycle safety at this intersection did get the tick because strategically it was a cycling corridor. That was the intention of it. And so this particular project got up because it was intended to deliver improved safety connectivity and safety objectives. And for those interested in how the corner refuge island is designed, well, you can see here we've got a few iterations as to how things change from day dot to actually what got installed. So the very first looked like a very small little jelly bean, basically. And there's a bit of concern as to whether or not that would actually be enough for vehicles to be able to see on the ground and to acknowledge that they shouldn't just drive straight over that. So they went for a little bit something larger. Once they got this, okay, we can get a little bit better safety benefit for cyclists once we've got a larger type of island there. However, we do need to take into consideration the exact swept parts and how that will look for general traffic. So you can see this one's smoothed out a little bit here, getting into more of a kidney shape. Then the designers were starting to consider, okay, well, what happens if we have lots and lots of cyclists that are parked here and they, start to block the pedestrian path and pedestrians can't cross anymore. So we need to make extra room for cyclists to be able to stop and congregate and wait for that green light to go. So they've, as you can see, they've narrowed that kidney shape to create that even, I'm not sure what you would call that, a wonky hot dog shape. And finally, the final proposal was kind of a combination of where we got started and the fourth iteration there. But you'll see that there's two different sections. The white section there is a physical curb, so a semi-mountable curb. And then the grey shaded section is mountable. And it's mountable purely for the reason to ensure that heavy and long vehicles can perform their left turn movements without tracking over that facility. And I will just highlight that although all these calculations and check have been put in place, tracking over those corner refuge islands still occurs frequently. So it's, yes, it sometimes looks fantastic on paper, but at the end of the day, we still are working within the field of humans, and humans make mistakes. And Humans may not see that there is a curb out there, and that may in turn result in them driving straight over it. Interestingly, when you watch the 360-degree video for this module, you'll actually get to see that live. So make sure you're panning around as you're watching the video. So what the project team had to do, because this was a new treatment, new for Melbourne, they actually mocked up a 1-to-1 scale of this intersection. So this is actually completely off-road facility. This is at a depot, and they've line marked the intersection at a 1-to-1 scale. So it looks exactly as the current intersection would be if the design were in place. And they got a whole bunch of stakeholders out on bikes, as well as getting someone in a test vehicle to perform a whole bunch of different maneuvers so they can feel from their own perspective exactly how safe or unsafe the facility was. We've got an aerial just to show that as well of this 1-to-1. So cyclists would travel kind of, perform this maneuver and perhaps turn down here while the stopped vehicle turns in left there, and they got to all experience exactly how that felt, both as the vehicle and as the cyclist perspective. And they also had pedestrians walking across as well, just to see how that kind of interaction worked as well. So that was all to do with the stakeholder engagement and to ensure that what is being proposed on paper also works within the real world, and without having to go to, let's test it on the public network first. Let's try it in these off-road environments where there's a few more safety measures in place. And Ken, I might get you to launch the poll now while I have a sip of water, because I appreciate I've gone through a lot of different content and good to get everyone engaged. So the question I've got for the group is, the most important feature of a protected intersection is it maximizing sight lines between motor vehicles and cyclists? Is it conflict paint? And that's the paints that you use to denote a bicycle lane, so green paint usually. Is it banning traffic movements, or is it separate phasing for general traffic and bicycle traffic?
Okay, Max, we're getting some answers flowing in nicely here.
Had any questions while I'm pausing here as well, Ken, I should hop into?
No, just talking a little bit about the DOT approval challenges with Albert Street, although the DOT was very much pushing for it to happen as well. But Albert Street's not an arterial road, is it? It's a local road.
I don't think so, yeah.
They're two local roads.
Yep.
Intersecting, but with the signals, certainly DOT is very interested. It's on the strategic cycling corridor, isn't it?
That's correct, yep.
Yeah. Okay, we've got all our poll entries, so let's share the results. Everybody is going for that first one, Max.
Oh, it's good that the good old-fashioned approach of repetition is sinking through to everyone, and the reason that we're achieving those maximum sight lines between motor vehicles and cyclists is through that offset between the traffic lane and the bicycle facility. So good to see. Glad to hear it. I'll hop back into the presentation, Ken.
Yeah. Do you have any idea of the cost
for this? Not at the top of my head. I could chase something up if you want to grab an email of someone, and I'll see what I can find. Yep. I'll take that one offline.
Thanks.
So I've got this, there's a few slides here that kind of are taken about a second apart, and it's going to show how a cyclist actually travels through this roundabout. For those with keen eyes, you may recognize that cyclist over there. But there's going to be a few different things to consider. This yellow line is meant to denote how a cyclist at a conventional roundabout would travel. This greenish line is meant to denote how that left turning vehicle is going to perform their movements. And I thought there was another arrow there that I must have included in that slide, but it is on the next slide. So we'll watch this space. So let's have a look. This is probably a really good point to just pause, and you can see how this is a physical curb. It's not something that's just, flush. It's something it is semi-mountable, but it does create obviously a fairly clear indication that general traffic should not be just driving straight over that. They should be ensuring that their left turn movements are tracking around that facility. And you'll also see there the mountable areas like that. Okay, so let's have a look at our yellow arrow. So this one is indicative of how in a conventional intersection, a cyclist would travel straight through. The next arrow is my left turning vehicle. And this lavender purple arrow is how the protected intersection caters for cyclists. So as you can see within this example, this vehicle at the moment would have a very tough time trying to spot a cyclist in this current position. So as a cyclist in this current position would need to make a decision. Am I right to go? Or do I have to stop my journey and let the left turning vehicle perform their movement, and then I will go after them? And I will say, yeah, legally, the cyclists are meant to stop and pause, or they're not allowed to filter when a general traffic have got their left turning blinker on. However, not all the time is there a left turning blinker, and not all the time is it on the wing mirror. Sometimes it's obviously at the back of the car, and you could already be side to side with the car, so you may not have any idea that general traffic is turning left. So that's something also to consider. Okay, so here we go at the point of potential conflict here. The yellow line is a conventional intersection. That's the movement of the vehicle, and that's the protected intersection. So you can see at this conflict point, very tight angle there, very difficult to be able to see as a motorist, whereas this offset that we've managed to provide really opens up sight lines. What I also really love about this particular instance in time is if you look at the taxi driver's field of vision, he's basically looking right at the cyclist where they are crossing. So this guy's doing a fantastic job. And also this intersection is just working exactly as it's meant to, whereby left turning traffic are slowing and they're looking for cyclists, as opposed to just assuming that they can turn left as soon as the light goes green. So that's really good to see. What makes a protected intersection work so well is also not just what happens at the intersection, but what is working on the approach. So there's a few things known as the stop zone, the decision zone, the recognition zone. And what's most crucial about this space here is ensuring that there's a clear space for both vehicles to see cyclists and cyclists to see vehicles. I've actually got another diagram which I just included. You may not have this in your notes, but this is from a New Zealand design code, which I think explains this quite well. But you can see on the left-hand side, it's obviously incredibly important for general traffic to have clear sight lines so they can see cyclists prior to coming to the intersection, and also for cyclists to have clear sight lines before coming into the intersection so they can give way. So obviously in these instances, these aren't examples of protected intersections, but the principles apply, whereby we need to ensure that there's nothing in this area here that could block sight lines and make it difficult for either road user to see each other. And that generally means parked cars, because if you have parked cars too close to the intersection, you won't be able to see one another, and you've created, or you've increased the risk of a conflict there. Okay, I've got another little option another little part of the day where we just ask what's wrong with this photo. So you can see another confused cyclist trying to work out what's going on there. I might just pop the cyclist out of the way. I might just move that banner down there as well so you can get a good look. But if you want to chuck into the comments anything that you see wrong with this intersection.
Okay. A few things coming in there, Max. And this is obviously not in Australia, this one.
This is in Canada, for those that are interested.
So quite a few people straight off the bat are talking about that drain. We've got the general question of where would you go as a cyclist? What else are we seeing here? Yeah, then we've got quite a few people questioning where to go, the pavement, the surface conditions. Cyclists have to cross the intersection laterally, uneven surface, straight into oncoming traffic, unclear path. Surface, I think we're seeing the same ones. Sign is too far back. Who gets priority? Direction change for silver car. Parallel to traffic. And the bad angle there. So wow, what's going on there?
That's right. I think, I think they've captured everything well. It's probably easier to say what's right with this photo. It's not a lot. There's so much going on, and I don't really understand what this cyclist, where he's come from or where he's going. It is interesting that the cycle facility just crosses over diagonally. That's not a common arrangement. If I was cycling this, I'd be pretty nervous because you've kind of got the risk of red light runners in this direction and this direction. So you've almost doubled your exposure to those types of crashes, which isn't fantastic. So you're basically riding through that diagonal approach, just hoping everyone has stopped and is seeing the red lights. But yeah, just something to show that it's not just Australia who is a New Zealand who's perhaps not achieving best practice at these intersections. And obviously, those issues with things like the drainage and just surface defects. Yes, it's a global kind of issue.
What would you like to see on that one, Max? Just the bidirectional continuing on the same side of the road, isn't it?
I'm actually not against going diagonally across. If that's where the kind of all the exciting things are on this side of the road, and then all the exciting things are on this side of the road, to me, it can make sense to put that diagonal movement. But if you were to do that, I'd encourage looking at maybe raising all these pavement at all the legs. So just to reduce the likelihood of any of those red light running accidents. And if someone was to run the red light at that location, hopefully that would be at lower speeds and you'd be more likely to be able to survive those type of collisions. So that's something that I'd look at there, but I'm not necessarily against providing that diagonal crossing point. I think there's one in New Zealand actually that I saw recently. So feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Anyone from New Zealand?
Thanks, Max.
Okay, so we'll move on to head starts. So for those that aren't familiar with that term, it's just those little boxes that are kind of installed at intersections that lets a cyclist prop in front of general traffic. I've got to say, this example C is incredibly rare, and I don't really understand the merits of ever installing it. To have this really, really narrow facility that kind of sits right in between two traffic lanes and then not extending it across the whole way doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. But there is additional guidance within section 5.3.5 if you are interested when to use each of these different types of examples. The main thing I wanted to discuss on this slide is they can be used as a means to let cyclists know where their cycle facilities continue. So for instance, in example B, you would expect a bicycle lane to continue going straight and perhaps going left as well. However, because there isn't a bike box that kind of extends over the right turn lane, you would expect that cyclists are not being actively encouraged to perform right turn maneuvers. If you compare that to example D, where the bike box is across all the lanes, you would expect that cyclist facilities are on the left, the through, and the right turn movement. So it can be a way to kind of use almost wayfinding to let cyclists know exactly where their facilities continue and where they are being encouraged to cycle next. The other thing that I just wanted to bring up in this particular example, example D, is a hook turn storage box. For those that haven't seen those before or don't know what a hook turn is, it's basically having to turn left to turn right, which sounds counterintuitive, but it can work quite well, particularly for cyclists, because instead of having to kind of cycle and then pop out in front of all these right turning vehicles, if there wasn't a bike box there, you'd have to cross right in front of general traffic like that to join a right turn lane, which is not a good thing to be doing. So instead, you kind of overshoot the intersection. I'll just draw a little example of what I'm talking about here. If you wanted to turn right here, you could overshoot the intersection and prop at the little hook turn storage box, wait for the red light for this guy, and then wait for your green light here, and then you can perform your right turn in that fashion. And I've got an example that shows that if you haven't seen those before, but they're used pretty commonly here in Melbourne. We seem to love the hook turns. When we're looking at left turn and through treatments, things can get a little bit interesting. What I've seen most commonly on the network is the bicycle lane will just end as you approach the intersection and there'll be nothing at all, which is not a good way to do it. Or the only occasional intervention is it'll say bicycle lane end, which is apparently meant to mean that yeah, everything's okay, because they've at least thought about it. They've at least said, oh, well, we'll just end the bicycle lane. But no, instead we can look at providing sharrows. So that's what people may remember from our previous webinar. And we're basically communicating to general traffic that cyclists now share that left turn lane, and cyclists would be able to travel both through and left at that location, as you can see in that sign there, left only bicycles accepted. Another way to do this is to kind of bend out the cyclist lane and to provide the bicycle lane all the way up into the intersection. If you were to do either of these approaches, and I've seen it only a number of times, it's not that common, but if you can provide like little raised, I've forgotten the word, but those bolt down little raised humps before general traffic actually cross over the bicycle path. What that obviously means is operating speeds are slower, and it also just encourage motorists to, just to ensure that they are approaching the intersection and where that conflict point exists at lower speeds. So there's a big win if you are able to install those. Let's have a look at an actual real example. This was an intersection on my ride to work, back when I rode to work. This is me traveling in an on-road bicycle lane next to the dooring zone. Not an uncommon facility, unfortunately. I think it's from memory only 40 kilometers per hour at this intersection. I could be wrong. I can't remember. But you'll see on approach to the intersection, they have that sharrow treatment. So basically, bicycle lane ends, but now you share the left turn traffic lane, and then I'd continue on my journey, going straight like that and continue. On my way home, however, let's have a look how things went. So I was on an on-road bicycle lane again, as you can see by the little bicycle symbol, and then everything just ended. And so I was forced to make this awkward merge into the central lane and then take that position right in front of vehicles to then continue my movement and pass through the intersection to continue my to get onto that bicycle lane. Really, really bizarre situation where you don't have consistency across the intersection. Both sides of the intersection have an on-road bike facility, so you would expect both sides of the intersection have the same treatments. However, that wasn't the case, and I certainly felt a lot more comfortable cycling to work than I felt from work. So just something to make a note of. I did say I was going to talk about slip lanes. I don't believe these are best case scenarios of kind of catering for cyclists at slip lanes. The thing with slip lanes is you've got these massive areas where a vehicle can potentially conflict with cyclists because they need to turn into their slip lane at those locations. The reason I've included it in this slide is because at least one point that is a benefit is rather than just applying the conflict paint or the green paints only within that conflict zone, they've kind of done it on advance to that conflict point and also on the departure as well. And that just makes it even more obvious that this is a bicycle lane, check for bikes before hopping into that slip lane. In an ideal world, I'd be looking at trying to move cyclists off-road in these facilities and crossing at raised crossing points, and then have maybe a protected intersection here and continuing their journey. Because there is quite a long period there where cyclists are basically exposed to left turning vehicles, and it can be quite daunting as a cyclist, particularly if it's in a high speed environment. Okay, I did say I was going to talk more about our hook turns here. So I've got this slide that hopefully explains it a little bit better in case you weren't too across what I was talking about before. But yeah, as a cyclist, you're able to turn to your left and pause and wait. And this is assumed to be a signalized intersection. And you can just stand there in front of general traffic. So a car would be about there behind the stop line. And when the lights go green, then you can just continue your movement. Another real big benefit about hook turns, as similar to what I was saying with the bicycle boxes, it's a way to provide wayfinding. So it's a way to communicate to cyclists, okay, the through movement may not be for you, but you can perform a hook turn at this intersection, suggesting that we want to get cyclists running in that direction. So presumably there'll be some type of cycle facility on that east-west leg in that instance. So it's just another way to communicate that message without actually having to put any signs there, which you may not be able to read in time if you're a cyclist. Here's a real world example of hook turns being used at every leg on this intersection. And here's how it actually looks on the ground. I've seen plenty of instances where this hook turn actually gets kind of implemented as part of the bike box as well. So you get one big bike box and it will have the hook turn symbol on the bike box as well. My preference is actually to bring it where it currently is, purely because if you've got cyclists that then need to cross over pedestrian facilities to access where they need to turn around, you've got this awkward conflict point now with pedestrians as well, which just creates an unnecessary conflict point. There is benefit in getting cyclists, further offset from the general traffic lane over here. However, if you can provide enough space, which is shown in this example, then I would recommend what's currently shown rather than just providing a massive bike box. Before I hop into this intersection, Ken, I might just check in with you to see if we've got any questions.
Nothing at the moment, Max.
No problem. Drop my pen. Okay, let's have a look at this intersection. Massive intersection here in Melbourne. Let's have a look what we've got here. We've got a service road that kind of runs on either side of this. We've got traffic lanes, through lanes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've got right turn lanes, and we've got trams as well. Lots and lots and lots going on at this intersection. I've taken a little snip of how things look down on the ground, and just so you can orientate yourself, it's taken about at this location here, and you're looking towards the intersection like that. Okay, I'll just get rid of all that ink. So this is how things look on the ground. You can tell very, very busy, lots going on, pedestrian crossing points. It's all signalized, obviously, just due to the size of it, but there's certainly a long space to be able to cross as a pedestrian to reach the other side, and as a cyclist to reach the other side there. Incredibly narrow on-road bicycle lane facility there. There's not a lot of space there to be able to, you know, safely cater for the width of a cyclist, or if you had multiple cyclists waiting within their space, wouldn't take long before they then block the slip lane, which, as I'm sure you could imagine, is not motorists' favorite thing for cyclists to be doing, but that's just the nature of this intersection. I did want to just mention bicycle signals though. So you can see on our pedestal here, we've got just a traditional signals there, too big. And then we have this little adjacent guy stuck there, which has just got the symbol of a bicycle, and they are given the head start. So in other words, it's just a green. There's no amber and red. It's just green. They go first, and there's loops on the bicycle lane, so they know when a bicycle is present. So that they're aware of when that happens. So it's not every single phase. It's only when cyclists are there that they get the head start. But yes, that's what that little attachment there is for. So there's bicycle signals. And so a cyclist can safely enter the intersection while every other movement is not permitted. So only cyclists, and cyclists coming that way as well, I should mention. So it's for that through movement. Just hop back to how things look on the aerial. So that is that's meant to denote a cyclist given the head start. So they are given priority ahead of general traffic. It's generally around the 3 to 5 second mark. So it's not like a long time. You probably wouldn't be able to ride the entire intersection before general traffic movements start up again. And that kind of leads to my next point, which is I used to cycle this fairly regularly. And the first time I came across this intersection, I was obviously a bit confused as to just the complexity and how big it was. And I actually wanted to cycle to get home, which was a right-hand movement like this, and continue my journey up there. And when I saw the green head starts go, well, I obviously just followed the path, my desire line, which was to turn right at this location as such. However, what would have happened in 3 to 5 seconds time, as I said, is that general traffic within this direction and this direction as well, they also get the green light, which means there's a point in time where I found myself right in the middle of the intersection, and general traffic were then given the green light to go, which, as you could imagine, was not a very comfortable feeling. So there's two kind of potential conflict points where this could have occurred. Is if you're just starting your movement here and you've got the green light to go as a cyclist, and then that drops off and general traffic go, you can get as a conflict point at that location. And obviously, as you're traveling through, assuming that the green is still for you, but general traffic also have the green, you've got a conflict point there. So the purpose of this particular slide is just to reiterate that the head start lights or signals, sorry, for cyclists are purely for this through movements. And if you were to provide for right turn movements for cyclists as well, then you need to look at doing particular bicycle signal phasing, which is not kind of taken in that stock standard single lantern that was shown before. So just something to consider. A cyclist may assume that they get the green light, they can perform the movement that they want to do, but it's not necessarily the case. Okay, I've got this slide here, which is in Western Australia. And we can see that the bicycle lantern is actually embedded within the lanterns itself. And they also have an amber and a red, which is also useful if you were a commuter cyclist to let you determine how much time you've actually got to pass that intersection before, having to obviously stop and assume that you're just going to hit the red. So I like these as a bit more, it's all kind of one face. It's a little bit tidier. And yeah, just another way to look at providing for cyclist signals. Once again, if you are looking on your strategic cycling corridors and you're looking at ways to improve the attractiveness of cycling facilities, the Head Start or bicycle signals, these lights just are amazing. It's a great feeling to be able to cycle ahead of general traffic, to push yourself out in front and get yourself in a better position, and to take the traffic lane if you needed to do that, rather than just everyone goes at the same time and general traffic at the same time. Then you're in a bit more of a predicament where you're kind of having to merge in between vehicles, which isn't too fantastic. The other thing that I did want to just touch on with regards to bicycle signals, and you could imagine if this light was green only for cyclists, so the cyclist movement had started, and imagine if you were, say, 20 meters down the road at this section here and approaching the intersection, and you see the green, you'd be trying to pick up speed because you know that you're going to get a green light. You're trying to get through there, and that's how you want to basically tackle this intersection. So you're trying to pump through there, maybe getting up to 30 kilometers per hour. And as you're approaching, you might even get up to this point here, or perhaps just 10 meters prior. As you're approaching, the general traffic also get the green. And it's that same conflict where you've got general traffic now, they get the green light and they want to perform their movements. And you're in this pretty awkward situation where you're already at speed as a cyclist and you've got to make a quick instinctive decision. Do I slam on the brakes and let the left turning vehicle go because it's likely they haven't seen me, or do I just go straight through? And this is a perfect instance where a protected intersection would help to reduce that risk. Because if I was a cyclist and I had a protected intersection here, I'd be getting taken off at this location and over here and like that, meaning the conflict point is more over there, giving vehicles more time to be able to see me, and also slowing me down as a commuter cyclist, which some may not, welcome as a particularly positive attribute, but there are certainly positives in slowing down commuter cyclists at these, risky intersections. So something else to consider there. That's all we've got for intersections today. I've included this final photo, which is actually the beautiful protected intersection that I was showing in Melbourne. This was part of that project, and ironically, they were installing a protected bicycle lane just behind this sign. However, in the meantime, it's basically cyclists can do whatever they want. So the traffic management or this temporary design did not cater for cyclists at all. They had to leave their on-road cycling facility and just merge in with general traffic where there's absolutely no facility. Very, very narrow traffic lane there as well. So unfortunately, it's a bit of a case of irony where you're looking at building best practice infrastructure, but what's been put in the interim is not really meeting that objective. But yes, just thought I'd include that as well. And Ken, I managed to finish a little bit ahead of schedule, so perhaps time for participants to hop onto the quiz.
Yeah, I thought I'd just quickly show in Moodle again what's where people can find things. Hopefully you can see my Moodle there. So we have just finished module 3 there. So you've got another 360-degree video to have a look at. And so you can click on that and it'll come up, and there you've got Max and a lovely protected intersection that you can have a look at, and then you'll get a ride through it as well. So jump into that and use your goggles if they're working for you. And you have the notes from today and the notes from today and the quiz for module 3. And so final module will be module 4, roundabouts, as you can see there, and you'll have one more assignment to do, but we'll get to that before the start of the next session. So you've got 5 minutes. You'll probably be able to knock off that quiz, no worries, and even have a look at that 360, and we'll see you a few minutes before the session on Thursday for a chance to win a prize.
Fabulous. Thanks everyone for the comments, and yes, look forward to seeing you on Thursday. Have a great day.
Thanks everyone.
Okay.